Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers. I'm your host SM Hali, presenting another edition of Defense and Diplomacy. This particular week there was a lot of hullabaloo because of the NATO summit conference in Chicago. The hullabaloo was whether Pakistan will be invited, whether Pakistan will attend, and what gains Pakistan will make by attending. But more importantly, we need to see whether this particular summit was a success as far as the end game in Afghanistan is concerned, whether peace is at hand. To study its aftermath, we are honored to have in our studio today Malik Zahoor Ahmed, who is a former bureaucrat, former diplomat, and currently the chairman of the Afghanistan, Pakistan, and US Tripartite Commission on Agriculture. Welcome, sir.
Thank you much.
Viewers, we are honored to have, not in the studio, but on the telephone, with us Syed Fakhr Imam, former member of the National Assembly, former Speaker of the National Assembly, and Minister for Education, and also one of the most suave and polished politicians that I've ever known. Assalamu alaikum, sir. How do you read me, sir?
Walaikum assalam, Hali sahab. Thank you very much.
So if you permit, I'll shoot the first question to Malik Zahoor Ahmed, sir.
Please do.
Zahoor Sahab, you were with us in the same studio 2 weeks back when we were discussing the visit of Hillary Clinton to India. And there was a young man with us in the studio who vehemently opposed President Zardari's going for this Chicago summit. And you had favored it. Hindsight, they say, is 2020. What is your opinion now?
Well, I still stick to my old arguments. I think it was the right decision and in the right direction. Absolutely.
I see. So, Fakhr Imam Sahab, do you agree with this viewpoint? Do you think Pakistan should have gone there because the first 12 hours of the president's stay over there, the situation, the media, as well as the international opinion was very hard on Pakistan?
I think in the global world today, Pakistan must always be engaged with all the major players of the world, and the United States happens to be at the moment a superpower. And in President Obama's speech that I was reading, he mentioned Pakistan 2-3 times in his speech, and he said, if I quote him correctly, that we think that Pakistan is part of the solution, and he's talking of Afghanistan. So obviously, President Obama and his advisors and think tanks, the Pentagon, the CIA, the White House itself, the State Department, they do feel that Pakistan has a very crucial, central role to play. But above all, I think Pakistan has to look at its own national strategic interest when we are doing business with the rest of the world. And NATO has been there for the last 10, 11 years in Afghanistan. And basically this was, and the Bonn conference before this, followed by Chicago, followed now again in Japan, which is coming up. And this is all working, these are all tactics working for a strategic exit from Afghanistan. You called it the end game. But I think we need to position ourselves in a pivot where we, derive the best cost benefit from our national and strategic interest. And we must, I think, there has been a major sea change from 9/11
Sir, if you hold that thought and kindly stay with us, I just need to solicit the opinion of Malik Zahoor Ahmed. So there was a media report which condemned the fact that President Obama did not thank Pakistan as one of the countries who have been helping out the NATO effort in Afghanistan. How do you look at this particular snub, sir?
Well, there is not one snub, there are two snubs. And there's a background story also, very interesting. When they invited President Zardari, they thought probably, I would like to take you into history also.
Very briefly, of course.
Very briefly. History means when last time when Musharraf was the president, Americans, whatever they asked us, we said yes, agreed entirely. You have just to read Colin Powell's book, and the whole story is there. This time again, they were mistaken. They decided to invite President Zardari. They thought once he is here and shares spotlight with Obama and other world leaders, he would agree to what they want him to do. But he did not. But this was the first snub. Second snub was when Pakistan requested a one-on-one meeting. And then they did not, accept it. And third time again, what happened that in publicly they acknowledged Russia, they acknowledged Central Asian republics for their help, but they totally ignored Pakistan. Pakistan is the biggest loser in this game, and I don't think it was very ethically. It was totally wrong because in the East we respect our guests once you invite them. But they did not.
But in fact, we paid them back in the same coin because the Americans have been insisting on democracy in Pakistan, and we have taken a democratic step stating that it is the parliament that will decide and not President Zardari, not the army chief, not the foreign minister, and so on. What do you...
Sorry, I don't agree with you here. Now, when you went to the parliament, going to the parliament for developing a foreign policy, it was a wrong decision. Because once you do it from parliament, the issue went into the public through the media. And once you leave such sensitive issues to the whims and caprices of the street, then it is very difficult to retrieve things. Right. That was a wrong decision.
Sayyid Fakhr Rahman Sahab, how do you see this, that the decision to take this particular issue to the parliament?
The responsibility of policy formulation, policy making, always in all democratic countries rests with the executive. And the executive is the government. And the government must always gets it endorsed those policies. The parliament debates, discusses, holds discourse on the policy issues. But the policy ultimately, the responsibilities are of the government to frame policy. And because parliament endorses the policy. And obviously the government has the majority, so they always carry the policy. So the nitty-gritty of the policy making has to be ultimately done by the executive. In Pakistan, it's always speculated. The perceptions are that in the past, most of the security and foreign policy has not been made by the civilian governments, but it has been made by our strategic institutions. Now, perhaps in order to soften some of that, it may have been brought to Parliament, but the government should have made the policy, then brought it to for the Parliament, because Parliament is the voice of the people, and there you're always going to get diverse opinions, which is true of all parliaments in the world, as you got this time. And the Parliament obviously wants, if you throw it to the Parliament, they will always want the best possible kind of outlook. Hence, it always makes it more difficult than when you go into a negotiation where the parameters are laid down by the Parliament. Now is the time where the space, this is where really leadership counts. How our leadership today.
Right, so due to paucity of time, we need to, I'm afraid, sir, we need to switch gears a little bit. Malik Zahur Ahmad Saab, do you think the NATO summit at Chicago brings us closer to the end game in Afghanistan, closer to the aspirations of peace?
Well, I don't say closer, but at least we are in the game. We have tried to look like we are not part of the problem. We are part of the solution. And they simply cannot ignore us. And that is, when...
But if you see today's development, in fact, it was yesterday, it has been reported today, that 58% of the aid has been slashed by the Senate Appropriation Committee of the United States.
Once Churchill said about Americans that I have no doubt about the ability of Americans to do the right thing. But unfortunately, they do the right thing only after making so many mistakes. It's a big mistake because Pakistan is going through lots of economic crisis, political crisis, military crisis, and we are at war. We are the biggest sufferer, loser in this entire game. How Americans can, leave us like that as they did in the 80s? just expecting us to hold the baby, and they ran away. This time again, if they do it, we, as Shaji said very rightly, we have to keep our national interest supreme. That's important. And then we sacrificed. 35,000 people were died, Our infrastructure were destroyed by this war.
35,000 people.
35,000 people. So the Americans should have realized it. And if they do it, I think the world will condemn them, Pakistan. And then you are not winning the hearts and minds of the people in this country. Americans are losers as well.
No, but let me ask Syed Fakhr Imam Saab, sir. Malik Zahur Ahmad Saab raised the point that Pakistan has lost, or rather sacrificed, 35,000 of its people. It has lost more than 70 billion rupees. But the thing is that at the Chicago summit, we saw that it was President Karzai who was asking for pledges of $4.1 billion to rebuild, reconstruction, as well as reconstruct his army in Afghanistan. But very little is being said about the losses of Pakistan. What is your opinion, sir?
You see, the focus was basically Afghanistan, because 140 to 150,000 NATO troops are stationed there. So for them, Afghanistan is the immediate issue. But Pakistan, as I quoted when he said that we think that Pakistan has to be part of the solution, this is President Obama himself saying that. So we obviously have a very major role in this, as is developed by 65,000 lives have been marked. 70 to 80 billion dollars we have, been lost in terms of different elements, of which maybe 18 to 20 billion dollars has come our way. And this is where the negotiators, initially, right at the start when we were negotiating, they put down certain mechanisms, and tragically none of this was put in writing. So for us, now we are negotiating or renegotiating after 10 to 11 years, and everybody can see where we stand. But there are also two elements. The Americans are facing a presidential election. Pakistan is facing another election. So in election times, which are extraordinary times, both sides are trying to get the best possible deal out of, if I may call it that, through these negotiations. And this is why the apology which was to be rendered to Pakistan for the lost 24 of our soldiers, unfortunately, has, keeps back and forth. And of course, the drone attacks on which they've brought in a new expert who's tried to define it in different through international law. Where we stand, when we read what WikiLeaks says, some of our people have been saying something privately, some have been saying things publicly. So this is part of the mutual diplomatic...
Right, sir. If you permit, I need to ask Malik Zahur Sahab, in light of your experience of diplomacy. You see, diplomacy is like fencing. You thrust, you parry, you riposte. The strategy that we adopted after the Salalah attack, we shut down the NATO supply route and a number of other things. Do you think we should at some stage have modified? Because Shaji just mentioned that at some stage they were ready to apologize to us, but now they are posturing because of the election year.
That's right. One election year, and secondly, we asked them to hold off temporarily. Our reaction to Salalah was, again, it's for the history books to decide. But I think it was a wrong decision. We did not do enough homework. We should have realized and worked on it, whether we were able to sustain this blockade. It's the one question. We did it. Then we have come up with the apology. I don't know why we raised this question in Chicago, apology, while Americans are not going to, unless the Pakistani side have some inside information where they think the apology might come from not from America but from NATO, quite possible.
But if you listen to the grapevine, there is some information that probably the US government may not apologize, but the Pentagon may apologize.
Well, it's the same thing. I mean, when the Pentagon apologizes, it's the government. It's a very important arm of the government, of the State Department, whatever. But this is not the question. The question here is that we are raising apology questions, then we are talking about drones. Drones have been here, for the last 10 years. Why you have all of a sudden, you have spurred into action and started talking against drone, but there's a watering down of our, request that we don't want drones to attack us. They say unilateral drone attack should be, carried.
But Malik Zahur Saab, if you just hold that thought, Sayyid Fakhr Imam Saab, you were talking about negotiations. Do you think we need to take a leaf out of Hamid Karzai's book? Because Hamid Karzai has been downplayed by many of us, being the mayor of Kabul and so on. But he has come out as a very astute negotiator. If you notice that on the 2nd of May this year, when President Obama came to Kabul to sign that strategic pact with Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai managed to get the US approval on two aspects. One, that the question of handing over the prisoners to Afghan authorities. The second was the dreaded night attacks, in which he made the US agree that in future the night attacks will continue, but with the help of the Afghan National Army. Similarly, do you think we can negotiate that the drone attacks may continue, but only with intelligence provided by Pakistan, or to be under the aegis of the Pakistani army?
I think this should be very much part of the negotiating agenda between our strategic institutions and between our governments, especially on both the drone attack side as well as on reopening of the routes, because in fact from what one can see in the media on the routes, it's come down to negotiation or bargaining on the quantum of monies per unit of trucks or whatever the transport they use to take that up. But I think in the longer-term aspect, there is also a lack of trust and confidence, basically, which needs to be re-established, which needs to be reasserted between the negotiators and between the power centers of our two countries. And that is where, because we have to look at the larger elements. We are in a region which is, we have great strategic assets to the whole area, so where we sit, the Pakistani area geographically. And with India and China, along with Afghanistan and Iran on our borders, we need to look at the longer term aspect on how we really need to put Pakistan back into the global picture. I think this
Right, sir. So
and
Malik,
the
okay, sir. I need to ask Malik. I need to ask Malik Zahur Saab, sir. What, in your opinion, should be the way forward for Pakistan?
Well, first of all, we need to know, have we crossed the Rubicon with the Americans? If we have, then it means there's no turning back, no stepping back from here.
I personally don't think we have, sir.
We have not.
No.
Then again, where we are, we should stand there. Now we cannot, because we have put our cards on the table now. I personally would say that let diplomacy take its course and we start talking to Americans. We need to, tell them what are our concerns. It's important. But, going to Chicago, as you asked earlier, I agreed. But what you say when you are in discussion with them, this is another question. And I have a serious concern, about the ability of both military and civil leadership in this country. And we need to revisit our policy apparatus, how foreign policy is developed, made, because it is too serious a business to be left alone to the Foreign Office, You have to involve all the stakeholders in this activity. Only then we can succeed.
But that is why the Parliament was involved. Perhaps the Parliament may not be involved in the policy making, but it can provide inputs.
No. Paul, I agree with Sayyid Fakhr Imam that we should not have involved Parliament. We should have first developed the policy outlines, sent it to the Parliament, and got its endorsement from them. By sending direct to the Parliament, we reduce the sanctity of the Parliament. It was demonstrated to the world that our Parliament is just a rubber stamp Parliament, and they had to agree. And this 14-point agenda, the Parliament sat on issue for 4 months. They kept the entire world on the tenterhooks for 4 months.
And thus we missed the opportunity for
missed the
getting an
opportunity for that.
apology. So, Sayyid Fakhr Imam Saab, as a final question, sir, what should be the way forward for Pakistan to make sure that we remain part of the solution and not be perceived as part of the problem, as some aspects of the world media is portraying us to be?
I think we keep on engaging ourselves with the U.S. as well as with all the NATO countries. And we look as if we have a meaningful kind of futuristic outlook, and that we are a reasonable, rational people with issues. And like all major diplomatic outcomes, that we can measure up and reach the standards and heights of a mature, a stable, astute, a secure nation.
Right. So viewers, with that we come to the end of this program, and we have had a very intense discussion with two very senior participants, very serious participants who probably have not only their fingers on the pulse of the problem, but have a very broad outlook. So I would think that this particular issue needs to be discussed by our media, by our parliament, and by the general public, not as an emotional issue, because unfortunately as a nation we are very emotional, and sometimes we let emotions get into the way of our decision making. We should look at it pragmatically so that Pakistan retains its position in the Committee of Nations as a responsible nation, so that Pakistan is viewed as part of the solution and not as part of the problem. Because unfortunately, we can choose our friends, but we cannot choose our neighbors. Afghanistan is there to stay, and we are a stakeholder in the peace of Afghanistan. I would like to thank you, Malik Zahoor Ahmed and Sayyid Fakhr Imam Saab. Thank you so much for your patience and for your cogent comments. Allah Hafiz.